Morning. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Douglas and Sarah Allison Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on our heritage.org website on all of these occasions. For those in-house, we would ask that courtesy to check that our mobile devices have been silenced or turned off as we begin. For those watching online, we remind you that questions or comments can be sent at any time, simply emailing speaker@heritage.org. And of course, we will post the program on the Heritage homepage for everyone's future reference as well. Leading our discussion today is Joshua Maservi. He is our policy analyst in Africa and the Middle East at our Douglas and Sarah Allison Center for Foreign Policy. He specializes in counterinsurgency, non-state armed groups, and the security development nexus. Before joining us here, he served in the Peace Corps as a volunteer in Zambia. He extended his service work for the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. In 2009, he joined Church World Services refugee resettlement operation based out of Nairobi, and he traveled extensively then in East and Southern Africa interviewing refugees. He joined the U.S. Army Special Operations Command in 2012, and prior to being here at Heritage was an associate director at the Atlantic Council's Africa Center. Please join me in welcoming Joshua Maservi. Joshua?
Morning, everyone. Welcome to Heritage. Pleased to have you join us for what is going to be an important and I think really illuminating talk with two experts on an important country, an increasingly worrisome one. I'm going to start by introducing Pete Hoekstra, who will be will deliver first comments. The Honorable Pete Hoekstra is a former U.S. Congressman. He served for 18 years representing Michigan's 2nd Congressional District. During his time there, he was chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence from 2004 to 2007, and he was the top Republican on that committee until January 2011. He currently is the Shillman Senior Fellow at the Investigative Project on Terrorism, which is the world's most comprehensive data center on radical Islamist terror. He has rich experience in the private sector, as a Fortune 500 business executive, among other things. His most recent book, and most germane to our conversation this morning, is Architects of Disaster, The Destruction of Libya. Highly recommend it. A deep dive into what's gone wrong with U.S. policy in that country. Our second speaker will be Dr. Aref Ali Nayed. He is the former ambassador of Libya to the United Arab Emirates. He is currently the founder and director of Column Research and Media and the chairman of the Libya Institute for Advanced Studies, which is a think tank based in North Africa. He has a long history of engaging in interfaith initiatives in that important work. He's written several books on the topic, including Vatican Engagements, A Muslim Theologian's Journey in Muslim-Catholic Dialogue in 2016. His most recent book on this topic was Radical Engagements, which is essentially a challenge and a counter to the radical narrative that groups like ISIS and other terrorist organizations propagate. So I'm going to keep it there because we want to get right to the comments from our speakers. Looking very much forward to it. Please welcome me in welcoming the speakers.
Excuse me. Thanks, Josh. Thank you for inviting us here. My responsibility this morning is to give a little bit of a historical perspective as to where Libya was and how it evolved through a period from around 2003 to 2011, 2012. In January of 2001, I received a new responsibility in Congress. I had spent most of my early years in Congress focusing on education and labor issues, budget issues, and those types of things. And in 2001, I was invited to join the Intelligence Committee. The objective was to see the world. If you remember early 2001, everything was pretty good. We had balanced budgets, we had a Republican president coming in, and things looked very, very positive. That all changed 9 months later with 9/11. And so for a former Fortune 500 business guy who was dabbling in intelligence. For the next 9.5 years, I probably spent 95% of my time in Washington, my professional time, working on nothing but intelligence issues. In 2004, I had the opportunity to become the chairman of the committee. And, you know, right after 9/11, it became clear through the Bush administration what they wanted to achieve in combating this new threat from radical jihadists. And the objective was to go out and to build relationships and to build allies in certain areas. And as part of that, they encourage members of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Armed Services Committee, and the Intelligence Committee to go and visit with countries that they deemed to be important for the United States to have relationships with, positive relationships with, that would help us confront this new threat that we were facing and didn't totally understand. So over a period of time, I had an opportunity through the encouragement of the Bush administration I traveled to every country that bordered Iraq except Iran. Had the opportunity to travel through, and meet some very, very interesting people that today would disqualify me from holding any position that would require Senate confirmation, because today if you've met with bad people, you no longer are qualified to hold public office, because it's now viewed as something that is totally inappropriate to talk to these people, even though they help shape foreign policy. So, I met with Assad, Bashir Assad in Syria. I met with Arafat. I met with Musharraf. I met with Karimov. So you just go through the list, and some of you may remember the Sunday insert on your Sunday paper called Parade Magazine. And every once in a while, once a year, they used to put in there, they put like the top 20 dictators, the top 20 in terms of worst leaders in the world, evil leaders. And I used to always just kind of read that for interest. And then one year I was looking at it, and it's kind of like, oh, I've met with him. I've met with him. I've met with him. And it's kind of like my wife kind of looked at me and said, what kind of job do you have if these are the people that you are meeting with? And I'd met with about half of these folks. And the context here is it was about building relationships and building allies and understanding the threats that we faced. And in some of these cases, we recognized that we needed to form these relationships to better understand the threat. So, I went to Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Turkey. All these countries were critical to us. And then in 2003, one of my colleagues came to me on the House floor and said, hey, Pete, how would you like to go to Libya and meet with Gaddafi? I said, no, not really. That's not on my bucket list. He says, no, I'm serious. We want you to go to Libya as part of a CODEL, because the Bush administration has asked us to meet with Gaddafi, because there are indications that this pariah state, this outcast state, for 20 years actually wants to come in from the cold, that they actually want to form a relationship with the United States. And so ultimately, a CODEL, we went to meet with Gaddafi. That in itself, the first time we met with Gaddafi is a story that you could spend an hour talking about, and I'm sure Arif could relate to some of the bizarre things that may happen. But, we landed in Libya at 8 o'clock, and finally by about 3:30, 4 o'clock, after driving through the desert, for hours, we finally had the opportunity to meet with Gaddafi in a big circus tent with the only thing in it were the 4 or 5 chairs for the CODEL and for Gaddafi. But it ended up being a fascinating process. I ended up meeting with Gaddafi 2 more times. So between 2003 and 2010, had the opportunity to meet with Gaddafi on 3 different occasions. And the question then becomes, why Libya? Obviously, the Bush administration back then thought that it was important that we stay, that if we could bring Libya in and that we could actually partner with Gaddafi and work with Gaddafi, that this would be a positive thing. It would now stabilize the entire top part of Africa, the northern tier of Africa. So you go from Morocco to Algeria, Tunisia, to Libya, to Egypt, that, from the Sinai to the Atlantic, you would have a group of countries that would be partnering with us to confront the threat from radical jihadists. It was important for us. It was also very, very important for Europe, as we're seeing today, because what you would have is you would have had this buffer. You've got Europe, Southern Europe, of course, you've got the Mediterranean, which is a buffer, but as we've seen, not a very effective buffer as some of these states in northern Africa, as they deteriorated, it has opened up the refugee flow into southern Europe. So it was viewed as being very, very critical in the fight against radical jihadists. It was viewed as being a buffer to protect Europe and those types of things. So it was an effort in recognizing the importance of Libya in the region and as a its geographic strategic location, that having Libya as an ally and having Libya be stable would be of great benefit in our efforts to confront, contain, and defeat the threat from al-Qaeda. Of course, you know the rest of the story. For a period from 2004 to 2009, Gaddafi actually participated and worked with us. I mean, it's pretty amazing to be sitting, in a Bedouin tent and with the minority leader talking with Gaddafi about how you fight the threat from radical jihadists and how you can work together. It's kind of, amazing to recognize that, when he decided to come in from the cold, we put a series of expectations on him, saying you need to meet these requirements before we actually begin the process of normalizing relationships, which means you've got to pay reparations to those who have been the victims of your terrorist attacks. You have to give up your nuclear weapons program. Which he did. We didn't come up with some convoluted scheme as to how we would monitor it and measure it and these types of things to make sure that they were complying with the requirements. They packed it up. They put it in crates, and a friend of mine, the former senator from Michigan, who was then the Secretary of Energy, they went to Libya, they picked it up, they put it on a boat, and a lot of you are younger, but for those of us who are fans of Indiana Jones, the nuclear weapons program now is in some big warehouse outside of Washington, D.C., sitting next to the Ark of the Covenant. And if you don't understand that, watch the movie. Okay, go see the movie. I don't have time to explain it all. But so he did all of those things, and then he actually cooperated with us in terms of sharing intelligence, sharing understanding about the threat from radical jihadists. And the reason that we know that is, another side note, their head of intelligence was a graduate of Michigan State University. And of course, I'm from Michigan, and he's a big fan of Tom Izzo and Magic Johnson. And his name is Musa Kusa. And I'm not sure what's happened with Musa since.
He's in exile in Qatar now.
He's in exile in Qatar. So it's interesting to be talking with a Michigan State grad in Libya about fighting radical jihadists, who happens to be the head of the intelligence services for Libya. So we went through this process from 2004, 2009, 2010, where Libya actually was stable. Life for the Libyan people was not great because of the tendency of who Gaddafi was. But in terms of our national security focus, Libya was where we needed them to be. Of course, in 2011, under a new administration, an administration that made a fundamental change in strategy, in that they decided that they would embrace the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm working on another book now talking about the threat of the Muslim Brotherhood and what a huge mistake it was in a calculation to embrace the Muslim Brotherhood. But the belief being that if we embraced the Muslim Brotherhood and engaged with the Muslim Brotherhood, they would change their behavior. And so in Egypt, we gave kind of the soft signal that said, you know, if the Muslim Brotherhood wants to rise up and go after Mubarak, maybe the United States won't stand in the way. And they did. Mubarak is overthrown. You've got a new government, and Egypt was almost on its way to, we almost lost Egypt. The second part was that we then engaged with, and this is what I go through in more depth, we started doing in the book is we started to engage, and that's why I call it architects of disaster. What happened in Libya was not an accident. It was by design, all right? The Obama administration knew exactly the background of the groups that they decided to engage with and who they worked with, and NATO knew the background of these individuals and these folks. And in Libya, we chose, and we chose badly. We decided to align ourselves with the Muslim Brotherhood or groups that were affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. And yes, overthrowing Gaddafi is not that difficult when you put together the power of the United States and NATO. Overthrowing Gaddafi is not that hard, and we did. But we made a miscalculation as to who we would engage with, and we totally miscalculated the effort that it would take and require to stabilize Libya and make sure that it would continue to be something that would be good for us and for Europe, a country that we could rely on, geographically an area that would be stable, and geographically an area that would not pose any kind of a threat, either directly or indirectly, to the southern part of Europe. And of course, that all has proven to be wrong. Okay. Ever since Gaddafi is overthrown, yes, they've had a couple of elections and those types of things, but Libya today continues to be a failed state, exporting its ideology, fighters, and weapons throughout northern Africa, and also into, from our perspective, weapons, fighters, and ideology made its way from Libya, made its way into Syria, and actually the equipment and the fighters became the core of what today we know as ISIS. But the important thing here is, from a historical perspective, back in 2003, we recognized that Libya was critical in the fight against al-Qaeda and radical jihadists, because for a period of time it exported more fighters to, I think out of Benghazi and Misrata exported and created more al-Qaeda fighters than any other area per capita in the world. So Libya was critical in terms of we needed leadership there to help stabilize and stop the outflow of fighters from Libya. It was strategically important to stabilize northern Africa, and it was strategically important to be stabilized so that it did not pose a threat to Europe. The last 2 or 3 years have proven that to be true, that an unstable Libya destabilizes much of northern Africa and provides a means for jihadists, ideology, and fighters and weapons to go into other parts of Africa and spread throughout Africa, and then it also poses a threat to Europe. So we've seen what happens when Libya was stable. We have seen what happens when Libya is unstable and the threat that it poses. The objective now, and the challenge to the Trump administration, I think they recognize this, is that they need to, and I think this may be one of the first places that we will see the Trump foreign policy play out, because they have clearly stated that they want to defeat ISIS. And if you want to defeat ISIS, you not only need to defeat them in Iraq and in Syria, you need to defeat them in Libya. Roughly 25% of the fighters that are currently identified as being ISIS fighters, roughly 20 to 25% of those fighters are now in Libya. So if you're going to defeat ISIS, you cannot ignore Libya. As a matter of fact, you need to put a focus on Libya. And if you want to defeat the ideology, you need to stabilize. You need to stabilize Libya. Otherwise, you'll continue to see the bleeding into northern Africa and into Europe. So it will be very interesting for us to see exactly the direction that the Trump administration takes in Libya, because it is going to be, I think, relatively near to the top of their priority agenda because of their commitment to defeat ISIS and their recognition to make that happen. They need to do it in Libya, and I think our European friends recognize the same. So we saw what a positive Libya could be. We've seen what an unstable Libya could be. I'll now turn it over to Aref to discuss how we move from a failed state in Libya to a stable state in Libya, one that has more respect for human rights and democracy than what it has seen in a long period of time, so that it is not only an area that is stable in terms of addressing the threats from radical jihadism, but also can become a beacon of hope for more representative government and freedom in northern Africa.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Josh, and thank you very much for this esteemed foundation for this kind invitation on such short notice, actually. And my gratitude to all the friends that made this discussion possible under very strict time limitations. I come to you from a very difficult situation. I have been traveling for now over 3 weeks, I think, to over maybe 9 countries, trying to do the liaison and the discussions to try to overcome the political impasse that we've been having, which I will explain in a moment. And just as we speak, the Qaeda forces that are legitimized by the Presidential Council and the Government of National Accord, directly or indirectly, which is recognized by the UN and the US government and everyone else, have managed to take 2 of the most important oil installations in Libya. So there is an ongoing fight. The Libyan National Army is amassing to try to push them back. So we are in the midst of a fight. And this discussion comes at a very opportune time, because not only because the parliament, the elected parliament, and under the authority of its head, the Honorable Aguila Saleh, are worried and have asked me to convey their views and their perspective to the new American administration, but also the fact that right now, if we don't manage to stabilize the country, we do risk a major civil war again in Libya. So it's a very risky and difficult situation, and I am grateful for the friends that made this trip possible and made this discussion possible. I also thank Pete, who's a dear friend and someone for whom I have great respect, and I learn a great deal from for this historical perspective, because it is very important. But I would also like to caution that we shouldn't think of the Gaddafi period as the good times and then this period as the bad period, because I was there in the revolution. I joined the revolution on the 2nd day of it. And I remember that it was genuinely a popular uprising. It wasn't just an Islamist conspiracy, and it wasn't a foreign conspiracy. There was definitely a popular uprising. I would also, however, agree that the revolution was, as many revolutions do, was very early hijacked by Muslim Brotherhood and Qaeda elements. And I myself suffered the marginalization and the pushing aside by these elements. I was, in fact, the head of the Libya stabilization team that wrote the post-revolutionary stabilization plan. But as soon as we got to Tripoli and managed to put the electricity back, the water back, get the fuel supply in order and so on, I was quickly, with my 70-man team and woman team, pushed aside because the Islamists pressurized the then head of the NTC and the head of the transitional executive office to basically tell us, thank you very much, great work, submit now everything to the ministries and go away. And I had a very difficult choice at that time. Do you revolt against the head of the NTC after such a dreadful process of revolution, or do you abide and basically try to go along with the government, hoping that there was enough resistance to Islamist ideas and Muslim Brotherhood ideas that the country would bounce back? I went back to my job. I was the first ambassador of the National Transitional Council in the UAE. And I went back to my ambassadorial work, stayed involved in fighting Islamists throughout these 5 years of office. As a matter of fact, I think many of them see me as one of their key opponents and on a weekly basis do character assassination and I hope not physical assassination, you know. I think maybe because I've been out of range. But the sad story of Libya is that we're always being given false dichotomies. It isn't, the choice shouldn't be between fascists of the military type, as we suffered for 42 years under Gaddafi, or fascists of the Islamist type. I think the Libyans, like you, aspire for the same things you aspire for. They aspire for liberty and the pursuit of happiness, as the founding fathers would say. And instead of getting liberty, we have even more tyranny now under Islamist rule. And instead of the pursuit of happiness, we've fallen into misery. The Libyan people are suffering greatly, have continued to suffer greatly, and their conditions have worsened. That's why trauma is in the title of this discussion. The Libyan people are traumatized. The numbers of killings and kidnappings and maiming and the rise of prices, the collapse of the health system, collapse of the education system, the fuel shortages, the prices skyrocketing, all of these combine to have a very traumatic situation for the Libyan people. And their choice should not be either stay under Islamist rule, which we currently have, especially in Tripoli and in the western part of the country, or to replace that with a military rule. We want civilian oversight, we want civilian rule, we want democracy, we want the dignity of the human being, human rights in the most sacred sense of them, and the rights of man, as the expression goes, and woman. And we're not getting there. And we're not getting there because of deliberate sabotage. This foundation here is part of state building. It's based on the idea that the building of a country doesn't end, that every generation has a responsibility to continue to build the nation. And in building the nation, you need to be rooted in your tradition and the vision of the founding fathers. But you also need to be open-ended and open to new ideas and expand the principles of the founding fathers. So you continue to try and help to build the nation. And this foundation has had a very important role in advising the Trump administration and is helping to actually build the Trump team, and has a lot of say in terms of advising, especially in policy terms, to the new administration. One of the key issues, has been the policy that Pete has mentioned earlier, which is the early commitment of the previous administration to making things work with the Muslim Brotherhood and to actually seeing them as the key allies in rebuilding Libya. The problem with the Muslim Brotherhood is that it's actually a transnational organization with transnational aspirations. It's as simple as that. To build a country, you need people who are committed to the nation state. That's very basic, I know, but it's very important to bear in mind. You cannot have partners in the building of a nation who don't believe in the state, but only believe in being parasitical on it to build their transnational agenda. Libya, over the last 6 years, spent something to the tune of $200 billion, okay? Of which the Libyan people have seen hardly anything. No new hospitals, no new roads, no new schools. Where did the money go? The money went to building the resources of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Libyan Fighting Group, which is the name of the Libyan branch of Qaeda. And Qaeda noticed what I would call the tagging syndrome that the UN and the US have, unfortunately, which is to designate groups by the tag. So if they change their name, they're no longer chased, okay? So we had this, and this is, I know it sounds very simple and very strange, but it's happening every day. So in Syria, you're actually arming Qaeda just because they changed their name. And I saw this like horrific video of someone wearing Osama bin Laden clothing, saying that they are no longer associated with Qaeda and their name is this such and such name. And the guys, even in his attire, like basically wearing the exact clothes of Osama bin Laden with the exact flag behind him, you know, the black flag and so on. And yet he's renamed and all of a sudden he's okay. In Libya, we had this phenomenon, which was called Ansar al-Sharia. And they used the black flag. They talked like bin Laden, believed the same doctrines as bin Laden, the same Salafist, jihadist, what I consider heretical doctrine. And they were called Ansar Sharia, and all of a sudden they were tolerated in Benghazi, and they were tolerated in Sirt, and they were allowed to fester in Sirt for years, you know. And I personally came, because I was also National Security Advisor to Abdullah Thani, the Prime Minister in the East. I came to this country several times, 2013, 2014, 2015, warning that the Islamists are taking over and that they are making Libya into their ATM machine and into their fueling station or gas station, and into a platform that will threaten the entire region, including Europe. I basically didn't get any attention except from Muslim Brotherhood lobbyists who are in Washington, who kept calling me warmongering and divisive and not inclusive enough. And this doctrine of false inclusivity is very important. It's a very, very important mistake that people make. We're told to be inclusive, but I ask you, can German democracy survive the inclusion of Nazis? Can Italian democracy survive the inclusion of fascists, of the Mussolini type? Can Spanish democracy survive the Franco type of fascism? It can't, because you're trying to insert into the structure that leads to the rise of the state elements that are antithetical to the rise of the nation state, because they have transnational agendas. Nazi Third Reich ambitions and racist policies cannot be reconciled with German democracy. And that is why in the German constitution, it specifically stamps out Nazism. But in the case of us in Libya, we kept being told by your own administration that we're supposed to be inclusive of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Libyan Fighting Group. And they were forced upon us again and again. Even as they lost every single election, we had two major elections. The Muslim Brotherhood and the Libyan Fighting Group combined, and all variations of Islamists, never got more than 5% of the vote. And yet, we were told to give them 50% of the power through power sharing mediated by the UN. Why? Because they happened to march on Tripoli when they lost the last election. So it is like Mussolini when he marched on Rome and assassinated his Marxist opponents and his leftist opponents, except this time they want us to bless our Mussolinis, okay? And under the UN flag, we were made to negotiate with these guys, being told to include them. What is the result? Through the Skhirat process, we ended up having a presidential council of 9 members who have to have consensus on anything, okay? Out of those 9 members, 2 declared Islamists, one jihadist, you know, called Ammari, and another Muslim Brotherhood, declared Muslim Brotherhood called Kajman, and then a variety of others who were not able to resist them, either through being under their influence or under their threat. And then the government, this presidential council, was forced to go into Tripoli under Islamist militia protection, okay? So this is an Islamist infiltrated presidential council living under Islamist militia protection. Okay? Furthermore, to add insult to injury, they appointed a defense minister who actually celebrated Qaeda figures like Ismail al-Sallabi, okay, and went to inspect the troops in Jufra, okay, in the south, and actually ended up blessing a man called Cherkasy, who led, up to now, 7 attacks on Benghazi and on the Oil Crescent. The head of the Presidential Council is a friend of mine. I kept urging him, appealing to him. I said, look, if you can't resist these guys, at least remove the legitimacy from them. Because in its wisdom, the United Nations, with the full, of course, cooperation of the United States, the UK, the Italians, the French, recognized the Presidential Council and still recognize the Presidential Council. And even last week your embassy in Tunis issued a statement of support, a joint statement of support for Presidential Council. But no one pays attention to the infiltration. How can you bless and support a defense minister of a government of national accord that actually supports Qaeda? Okay, and this is not fiction. This is documented. They took their photographs together. The Mufti, who's our kind of Mullah Omar, okay, they're the equivalent of Taliban. These guys, okay, in the Afghanistan situation. The Mufti kept urging, even this week, he said, you must do jihad in Benghazi. You have to go and attack Benghazi and do jihad in Benghazi, and no one says anything. Like sanctions were imposed against the head of our parliament. And yet no sanction was ever imposed against this Mufti, who is our Mullah Omar, basically, okay? So even though he actually advocated bloodshed, he advocated attacks, okay? So we have this weird phenomenon, okay, of the most sinister elements in our country, sinister in that they are not interested in the country, because they took the money of the country and gave it to Syrian radical elements. And, ask yourself, where did ISIS get all the flashy new cars and equipment when they first rose, with the uniforms that matched and everything was clean and organized, big propaganda machine? Where did the money for all this come? And the money came from Libya. The logistical support came from Turkey that allowed them to pass through very easily, and that actually gave medical care to their fighters and facilitated the passing of weaponry into Syria. So we're asked to form a democracy with these guys, okay? And when we object, and I think I was the most vocal in objecting to all this, we get accused of not being interested in democracy enough and not being democratic and not being inclusive. I was in Algeria last week, and I told the Algerian officials, I find it weird that when you do the dialogue sessions, that I see at the table 5 Islamists, one of whom has only 2 members in his party. And I see that entire tribes of Libya, like the Tarhuna, who are about 600,000 people, or the Urshafana, who are about 500,000 people, or the Urfalla, who are about 700,000 people, completely absent and unrepresented. Why? Because they don't go along with the UN contention that we must have this so-called inclusive process. So this false inclusivity has led to the infiltration of the Libyan state. Despite all the chaos that you see in Libya today, there are certain stable points that never changed since 2011. Most importantly, the Central Bank of Libya governor, the head of the financial controlling ministry or authority, and the deputy head of the defense ministry, deputy head of the interior ministry, they never changed throughout these years. And they always stayed with Muslim Brotherhood. They always stayed with the Libyan fighting group. How can the state rise when the very joints of the country, the state, the nation, are actually held by people who don't believe in the nation state? So I believe in the inclusivity that sets certain conditions about being included. To be included, you must not exclude others unfairly. And to be included, you must be a citizen, in the sense of being someone who is interested in the rise of the country. So, having not been heard in 2013, 14, and 15, I am hoping that the change that you have just had in this country may open the way to perhaps a reconsideration of your policies. Because quite frankly, someone asked me, a friend of mine, what would you ask America to do for you? I said, we don't want anything from them. We don't want your soldiers to fight our fight. We don't want your money. Libya is rich enough. We don't want you to actually help us in any way. All we want you is to just relook at your policy. this crazy policy which undermines your own interests, okay, of actually supporting Muslim Brotherhood and Libyan fighting group elements who are not only undermining Libya, but because they're undermining and destabilizing my country, are a threat to your country. So the Libyan people want dignity like all other people. The Libyan people want to live freely, to live happily, to enjoy the wealth of their country equally. That's what Libyans want. And that's what Libyans didn't get. And forgive me, but part of the reason they didn't get that was every time we tried to push the Islamists back, somehow we were forced to let them be active by the international community itself. So I am hoping that this foundation, which is so key and which has the capacity to articulate and has the connectivity to get a listening from the new administration, I think it's time to revamp your Libya policy big time. And experts who are experienced deeply with the situation of the past, like Pete, can actually contribute to this a great deal. I actually would sincerely hope that Pete would accept being an envoy to Libya, or because we need someone like him. And there are some people here in Washington who know what's going on. We need someone to hold the Libya file, because not only are the Europeans confused about certain points, but they're having the elections. And these elections will lead to confusion and instability in their own policies for the foreseeable future. The Italians have theirs, the French have theirs, the British just had that change. So it's extremely important that America has a leading role in all this. But it has to be a role based on a reconsideration of what's going on. This is very painful for me, and perhaps some of my difficulty in speaking today is because of the pain I actually feel. I remember that in 2011, I walked into Ambassador Stevens' office. And as I was walking to see him, I was the head of the stabilization team at the time, in the Tbisti Hotel. He had his embassy in the same hotel I was staying in. And as I walked in, I saw these Islamist leaders sitting in the waiting area. So I went in and I said, Ambassador, before we discuss anything, may I warn you that the very guys sitting in your waiting area are a threat to you. He said, no, these are part of the katibas we're using for protection of the embassy. Okay. Now the Benghazi disaster, its real reason is precisely this policy of trusting the Muslim Brotherhood and the Libyan fighting group. And your ambassador was killed by these people, not by anyone else. And when the Libyan people of Benghazi, the young women and men actually went out and demonstrated, many Americans don't know this, but young women and men of Benghazi went out to demonstrate in what was called the Benghazi Friday. They went out to demonstrate, and they actually physically pushed the militias out of Benghazi without weapons. They lost a good number of people, but they actually pushed them like they're massive demonstrations against the killers of the ambassador. Guess what happened after that? The leadership of Libya, the Islamist leadership of Libya, showed up in Benghazi, and on a platform, the photo is there, okay, with the militia leaders, okay, said that it was wrong to push these militias out because they're legitimate. And your administration at the time failed to say, no, these young people represent what America stands for. They're Jeffersonian, they follow Lincoln, okay, in their aspirations. And you guys are the ones who killed our ambassador. No one held them accountable at the time, and they got away with it. It was that abandonment of the aspirations of the Libyan revolution that has led to all the disasters that we have seen. Today, I talk to you here, and the only source of income of the Libyan people has been attacked by what's called Saraya Benghazi, okay, the Benghazi Defense Brigades. This is headed by a man called Sharkasi, in total alliance with the Qaeda Ismail Salabi and his affiliates, and with the Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood militias of what's called the Duru of bin Hamid and others. Okay, and this is the most painful part, having been inspected, okay, in a troop inspection by the defense minister called Barghati, who's the defense minister of the government of national accord of the Presidential Council, recognized by the United States of America and by the UN. And whenever we want to change this Presidential Council, and I will readily admit, I'm trying to replace the Presidential Council, okay? And I am one of the contenders for this post. When we tried to change the Presidential Council, we told, no, you have to really be patient and you have to be inclusive. And as we are being patient and inclusive, these guys are attacking the oil terminals and attacking Benghazi. They tried 3 times to attack Benghazi. And thank God for the air power of the Libyan National Army and its determination. It's been fighting terrorists for 3 years without any international support. As a matter of fact, with international undermining, okay? And they've pushed back the Islamists out of Benghazi in a dreadful 3-year fight that has cost us something like 6,000 young people, okay? And yet, no one is helping the Libyan National Army, and they're standing by as a Qaeda army is being blessed by the UN and the US into attacking the East. So there was a good statement yesterday that called for cessation of hostilities. But the way the statement is written, it actually equates the Libyan National Army with Qaeda troops, okay? So the policy is still there because of the new administration hasn't had a chance to revamp all the policies and to change the various embassy staff and so on. So we're still going on the previous administration's policy, okay? I came to Washington to urge you to quickly relook at what you're doing to us, because you're not only not helping the army, you're actually undermining our attempt to replace the Presidential Council by simply following the blind policy of saying that this is the legitimate government of Libya. Another very key area is the Central Bank of Libya. I tried 12 times submitting evidence, okay, that the central bank governor and some of his staff are actually facilitating the arming of Islamist militias by giving them trade finance. Today, if the central bank gives you $10 million, you can go out in the black market and make them $70 million, dinars, sorry. Instead of, because the official rate is supposed to be 1-to-1, the black market rate is 1-to-7. Okay, so you can imagine by opening trade finance to chosen Islamist companies, you can finance everything. And we're being killed by our own money, okay, because of the central bank governor. I complained to the previous administration, and several times, documented, okay? And not only did they not do anything about it, they said you should not undermine the governor because there's what they call the de-risking process that could shut the banking system down. I was saying, what more risking can there be than to have an Islamist governor or an Islamist facilitating governor, you know? So this governor was fired by the legitimate parliament in the East 2 years ago. We haven't been allowed to implement the removal of the governor because his signature is the only signature recognized by your financial system. Because, as you know, we trade in dollars, so everything has to be recognized in New York. Okay, so if I am to be asked what do we need from America, is just wake up to what's been happening. You have been advocating Muslim Brotherhood, Libyan fighting group for the last 6 years, and you're still expecting us to rise as a nation. That is like saying to the Germans, allow the Nazi party, give the central bank to the Nazi party, but you must have German democracy. That just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So please reconsider the policy. Please urgently appoint an envoy, a special envoy to Libya that can hold this file. Please stay as leaders of the file. Don't give it to any of the regional or European powers because they're all going through their own instabilities. And we need a clear defense of basically Jeffersonian democracy in Libya. So the choice is not either a Gaddafi type of rule or Islamist rule. The choice, the third choice, and the choice for which I went out to the streets in 2011, and so did many young people, is the choice of liberty and the equality and the pursuit of happiness. That is what we want, and I think such a third choice does exist. And there are enough young people and women and men. We're working with the tribes, the social fabric of Libya. They all want this. We're working with women groups and held several conferences organized by the Libyan Institute for Advanced Studies, and that's what we hear from them. We hear the same things from youth, be they city youth or village or tribal youth, and we have a group of elders and women leaders coming to the UN to explain just that next week, inshallah. I hope maybe you can get a chance to hear them out. And I can tell you that the Libyan people just want a good and free life. And you need to look again at the policy that you have been pursuing. I am sorry, due to the time restriction, there's so much to cover, but these are the basic things I wanted to say, and I'll be more than happy to document for you any of the claims that I have made. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thanks very much. So my first question for Pete is, are you going to be the special envoy to Libya? No, just kidding. So we unfortunately don't have much time, but we do have time for 1 or 2 questions. We do have to clear the room at 11. So please keep them pithy and to the point. Yeah. Oh, you got a microphone right here.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, Dr. Nayed. Obviously, I agree with you that a firm change of U.S. policy is needed, and your point about the central bank governor has been a mystery in U.S. policy. We couldn't agree more. But your case is strong enough, so I wanted to call you out on a few alternative facts that you might have mentioned. One, obviously, is in the 2012 GNC election. More than 25% of the vote went to the Justice and Construction Party. You can look at my article in Middle East Journal with Haley Cook. The second thing is about ISIS financing. Libya was a net benefit from central ISIS. You can look at my report with James Roslington and Hate Speech International. So almost no funds from ISIS in Libya ever made it to the Levant, so that's just something that's not true. And then you say that the Siraya Difa and Benghazi are the same as Al-Qaeda. I can't necessarily give you a citation that disproves that, so I want to ask you a question. Show me that that's the case, right? Because what are the ties between Mahdi al-Barghathi and Al-Qaeda? They're very unclear to me. I'd love to know about them, and that's a very pithy question. And just as a suggestion, I want exactly the same thing as you in terms of a new Trump administration policy with an envoy that has leadership that helps deal with the jihadi threat in Libya. But I think that by keeping on the straight and narrow and not exaggerating the nature of what's happened, we'll achieve that aim much better. Thank you so much.
Hans-Georg Gadamer, the philosopher, says that all interpretation is highlighting. And sure, as I would admit that as I highlight certain points, of course, it will sound exaggerated because I need to make those points as clear as possible. The nuances cannot be handled in a talk as short as this. For the connectivity between Barghouti, Qaeda, Libyan Fighting Group, the Muslim Brotherhood, you can look at some very important recent articles published in Al-Marsad newspaper, which is almarsad.ly. And there are, I think, something like 7 reports with details, photographs, documents about these connectivities. So you can go to that citation. Regarding the ISIS financing, I don't know how you keep track of ISIS financing, but what I can tell you is how we keep track of Libyan letters of credit open to certain figures who are associated with the people in Turkey, including some diplomats, unfortunately, and some banks with specifics, and where these LCs basically gave the money to these Islamist companies. Now, chasing it outside of Turkey, exactly, I can't quite get you the receipts from ISIS, but I'm sure that when you capture some of their places, you will see, as what happened in Misrata when 700 brave young Misratan people died fighting ISIS, okay? The documents that were found are just being analyzed now, and it's amazing how complicit. So we have direct evidence of the complicity of people like Bousidra, for example, with ISIS, okay? But the financing of ISIS in Syria and the weapons shipments, we have fairly good documentation, which has been given to the right agencies in your government. So I hope that they will be pursued, okay? All right, I don't, there is enough mischief that I don't think I need to make it up, and it's well documented stuff. Now, regarding the 2012 election, it's because they wrote the election law, okay? And that's another thing. They also wrote the constitutional declaration. Or to put it more precisely, Egyptian advisors of the Muslim Brotherhood did that at the time, and they had an operations room which called itself the Tripoli 5. Actually, there was a BBC interview with them then. They were very proud of it. And just look, BBC, Libya, Tripoli 5, and you'll find an interview by their head and on how they did all this. So I hope that we have more time to on one-on-one discussion. I'll give you my email, and I can send you some of these references. But thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for your expert work on Libya. Really great. Thank you.
So this will have to be the last one, very briefly.
Pleasure to meet you, Dee Kennedy. Given that Saras just went out and met with Moscow, I was wondering how you saw both Russian policy and U.S. policy working together in Libya.
There is a post-World War II order, okay, that did not come by coincidence, but by millions of lives, okay. And your soldiers in those years, and we honor them because, and we have graveyards in Libya that have those soldiers that we honor, but unfortunately these jihadists actually destroyed some of these even graves, okay? We honor this post-World War II order because it was paid dearly for, and our pious and righteous king Idris created the Sanusi army to fight with the allies, okay? This order should not be given up through trickery, okay? You need to consider very carefully what 2,000 kilometers on the Mediterranean mean. The Russians have gone through this war in Syria mainly because of a single port, okay, on the Mediterranean. So imagine what 2,000 kilometers would do, okay? Libya is for Libyans. It's not for Russians or for Americans, okay? But the Libyan people, if they were to be made to choose between the two, should say, no, we're not making that choice. We will work with any nation that is friendly with us, that wants to help us, that wants to have a win-win situation. But under no circumstance would Libya give up or give what do you call it, Mediterranean bases on the you know, for Russia or for any other country. I believe that the most productive route to go is to first reconsider your own policy and to have a reasonable discussion with the Russians, because I'm sure they would want to bundle Libya in with the Ukraine and Syria and other things. I think it's more like posturing that wants to use us as a bargaining chip. Okay, and I don't think that it's a very dignified thing to be for a nation to be a bargaining chip. Libya is for Libyans, and Libya is big enough, mature enough, and has enough educated people to rise. Yes, our rise, as our plane was rising, the sheer winds of Islamists and Qaeda have made us crash. But we are only a failed nation in our present misery. We are not failed in our aspirations. And make no mistake, we will make it. And we've been fighting very hard, and we're not asking anybody to die for us. We're dying for ourselves, okay? And we're dying for you also, because the 700 young Misratans who died in Sirte died for Italy and for France and for everybody else, because they destroyed ISIS in Sirte. But ISIS now is all over the place also. And very important, you must never make the mistake of limiting your fight against Islamists to ISIS, because Qaeda is also dangerous and somehow got neglected, you know? And now the only targets ever hit from Qaeda are what are called high-value targets, you know. But there is no concerted effort to study the phenomenon of Qaeda infiltrating states. And they have a document about this. They actually said what they're going to do, okay? And this document was also duly given to your agencies. And they say clearly that the way to rise now is to do political guerrilla warfare, not just physical guerrilla warfare. So they've learned how to take over central banks and governments, and unfortunately, under the pretext of so-called inclusivity. Thank you very much.
Well, I really wish we had longer, but there's so much we could discuss here. We do have to clear the auditorium, unfortunately. We can continue the conversation out in the foyer if people want to linger, but please join me one last time in thanking our panelists.
Thank you very much.